Welcome to the Benzo Free Podcast, your home for an honest, straightforward, and personal discussion about anti-anxiety drugs, their effects, and how to deal with dependence and withdrawal. Whether you have taken benzodiazepines, Z drugs, or any other tranquilizers, know someone who has, or you just want help dealing with chronic anxiety and insomnia, this is your podcast. I'm your host, D.E. Foster, author of the book, Benzo Free, The World of Anti-Anxiety Drugs and the Reality of Withdrawal. I'm so glad you joined us today. Please stick around and let me bend your ear for a few minutes. It just might feel a little better on the other side. Well, hello there. This is D, and welcome to episode 123. That just rolls off the tongue. Episode 123 of the Benzo Free Podcast, and I am so glad you joined us. As you might be able to tell, I don't know, I think I'm in a pretty good mood. I've been in a good mood lately, and I love to share that with you because I'm not always feeling good, or I'm in a wave, or, you know, my mood's not up, and I like it when I can share that. I for those of you that have subscribed to all our posts, you saw I posted a blog post yesterday about just taking a break. And I took a break in the rain, sat out on the porch when it was raining outside and just chilled for a while. Even though I have tons to do, I just stopped and did that. And it really helps. And I've been doing more of that. And I've also been reserving my weekends more for weekends, for relaxation. I've been working majority of my weekends for like 3 years straight, and, you know, trying to put this together and taking care of my folks, and all traveling back and forth and everything. And I'm trying to slow down that pace a little bit and actually allow that break for my wife and I to enjoy each other and the things around us and our friends and family and stuff. So we had a couple over for dinner on Saturday night. It went great, had a great time. I took some time for myself Sunday morning in the rain to just watch the squirrels, and that was great. My attitude towards some of the medical tests I still got to do has really improved. I just have a better outlook, and I don't know, I'm excited about things. I'm excited about what we're doing here. We got a lot coming up. I got to record a couple different things this week, and you'll be seeing those coming out. There's so much happening in the Benzo community right now, and I'm involved in like half of it, so it's just kind of crazy. Maybe not half of it. I know there's a lot more going on that I'm not part of. But anyway, all that to say, I just wanted to do this real brief intro and say, hey, one of the things I do want to mention really quick is I mentioned that peer support training program that we've been putting together through the Benzodiazepine Action Work Group. We are launching our first full all-out, and these are the paid courses. Just so you know, these are paid courses. You have to pay a fee to take them. But our first all-out course here in Colorado this June. So if you're interested, go check us out at benzopeertraining.org. Now, this first class or two are Colorado residents only, and that is primarily because our group is funded mostly by Colorado, because we're a Colorado organization. But this course will be going national, so don't worry. Just the first couple classes, we need to make sure we start with a Colorado base. But then with our partners like Choices Training, we'll be teaming up with them to do more training throughout the country. And that'll be coming soon and be available to everybody in the U.S. So I'm hoping you'll look for that. But if you want to get more information, again, benzopeertraining.org, go check that out. You'll see the new course and you'll learn a little bit about it. This course is geared towards anybody with lived experience, anybody who's like a substance use disorder recovery coach, social workers, therapists, peer support professionals or peer support individuals, anybody who wants to get some formal training on how to help people specifically with benzodiazepines, and that's what the course is for. So, and this course is certified in the state of Colorado, so it worked towards certifications, and we're trying to coordinate that with other states too as we launch nationally. So just wanted to put that out there, let you know what's going on. I will have a post out probably by tomorrow. Today's Monday. I'm recording this probably tomorrow, Tuesday, with more details. So if you're on our newsletter, you'll get that. So, I kind of rambled that off quick because we got this great conversation I did with Naftal Benisty, a podcaster, and I want to get to that, and that's the entire rest of our podcast. So I just wanted to sneak a few things in here, but keep my intro short as much as I can, and then we can move on. But I always want to pause for a second and just check in with you, see how you're doing. I hope you're making use of some me time like I was just talking about. I hope you're finding new ways, like we had the post about telling the different story and finding a different story to tell yourself. And that was kind of geared towards telling a different story about your anxiety, but that fits perfectly with benzo withdrawal and bind too, because it's, what's the story you tell yourself? Is it all about being harmed and the anger and the frustration that goes with it? Or have you found a way, as many of us have, to move past that and seen it as a story of a challenge and just a new thing that happened, in a way you have to adapt and learn to live with it, but there's still an exciting life and you're gonna heal and things will get better, and so it's finding that kind of thing. I think that's a good message. It's a good message to cover. So anyway, I'm sitting here drinking my chai. I have switched over, just so you know. I've been trying to switch to my chai from milk with my chai. It's my drink in the morning. I like chai, and I often have a little vanilla or pumpkin spice, in the fall, flavoring in it. And then I was doing just the milk with the chai latte. But I've been trying to get away from that because I don't do great with milk, even though I still succumb to it. But I couldn't quite get it used to almond milk. I couldn't get used to soy. I couldn't use the other things. So anyway, I have finally, by eating a lot of oatmeal lately and everything else, gotten used to this taste of oatmeal and even preferring it now. So now I get my chai with oat milk and I don't have the reaction to the milk. So yay, like you really needed to know that, but that's just me rambling. If you listen to my podcast much, I do that. And sometimes I just like to share the tiny little anecdotes of my day, because I think it kind of connects us up a little bit. So let's move on. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever you want to find us. Our handle is @EasingANX, with the exception of Facebook, where it's @EasingANXFB. But of course, all our information, the easiest place to find, I even had somebody ask this just a little bit ago, is at our website, easinganxiety.com. Everything is there. Every podcast I've ever produced, all the articles I produced, all the old videos I did for anxiety, they're all there, easy to find, fully searchable, in categories, whatever. So I try to make it very easy for us to find things that you want to. Please go there and check it out. And you can learn more about all the different content, all the different subjects. You can set up your own personal profile and start to become a part of that online community we're setting up, which, yes, in the next couple weeks, I'm going to start being on there a lot more. I had a lot of other work to do, but I'm going to be on there and I'm going to start communicating, and we're going to set up some chats, and we're going to just have some fun. So if you're interested in being part of that, go to our website and sign up. And you can become part of you can set up your own personal profile, log in, and you can be part of that as we start to do that. And don't forget, one last thing, of course, the Benzo Free podcast is for informational purposes and should never be considered medical advice. In fact, I'm going to go and sneak in our disclaimer right here. That way we won't have to do it at the end of the interview. So allow me about 25 seconds for a disclaimer, and we'll move in to our conversation with Naftal. Thanks.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice in any way. The host of this podcast is not a medical professional, nor is he engaged in rendering medical, health, or psychological advice, nor any other kind of personal or professional services. The views and opinions expressed by our listeners and interview guests on this podcast, whether read from textual submissions or presented in their own voice, do not necessarily reflect those of the Benzo Free podcast or of its host. Withdrawal, tapering, or any other change in dosage of benzodiazepines, non-benzodiazepines, or any other prescription drug should only be done under the direct supervision of a licensed physician. Our full disclaimer can be viewed on our website at benzofree.org/disclaimer. This podcast is a production of Denim Mountain Press. Copyright 2018, all rights reserved.
Alrighty then. Our feature today is a conversation with the Dutch podcaster Naftal Benisty. This is a podcast from the Netherlands that he put together. And, even though I'm US based, as the majority of our listeners are, I think followed closely maybe by Canada, maybe not so closely, but followed by Canada. Our podcast is still listened in all corners of the globe, and I just love that, and I'm amazed by that. I love the reach of podcasts for that. And it's great to hear from people all over the world, and I really get a lot of good information. And one of the true tragedies of the benzo dependence crisis is that it is worldwide. And unfortunately, even though we have a long, long way to go here in the U.S. regarding, awareness, education, support, it's often worse in many other countries, and even seems hopeless at times. But then someone tells me about a resource, like Benzo Tired, from the Netherlands, and I start to see what grassroots people are doing in other countries, and often doing because and following in the footsteps of other people that have led the way. Like, you know, you go back to the 60s and Malcolm Lader, and of course Heather Ashton and her manual, and Shane Kenny and his documentary in the UK, and of course coaches like Baylissa and Jennifer Lee and all the other ones out there, and organizational founders like J.C. Curl and Bernie and Carrie Silvernair with BIC and the Alliance, respectively, and then I start to see this new crop of people, even doctors and therapists and organizers and coaches and advocates and policymakers and YouTubers and, yes, podcasters coming just out, and because they'd seen some of the work we've done and these other people have done, and they wanted to do something and to carry on the tradition and to do it with passion and providing education and have the empathy and lived experience and support for this benzo harmed community that so many of us know so well. And it's hard not to feel the hope building and to feel that we're making a difference and to feel like we're in good hands. There's a lot of people, and my guest today, Naftal, is one of those people. After having a conversation with him, I feel like he's got great background for what he's doing. He's been through hell with benzos. He gets it. And he's learning from so many people out there like Geraldine Burns and other people who were some of the pioneers, especially in the benzo podcasting arena. And he gets it. And he's making a difference and he's helping people. And I'm just grateful that he took time to talk with me for the podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about him real quick. Naftal Benisty is a Dutch-trained social worker. And after being treated, for Lyme disease in 2016, he developed a debilitating. I'm really good at talking today. I'm sorry. I'm going to back that up a second. My apologies. After being treated for Lyme disease in 2016, he developed debilitating tinnitus. I think he says tinnitus, I say tinnitus. They're both correct, and nobody's wrong here. It's just two pronunciations. Also dealing with a lot of insomnia. And he was prescribed benzos, and he sought help to deal with chronic fatigue. And then after receiving CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, he wanted to come off this high dose of benzos that he was prescribed. Unfortunately, due to the lack of education of his doctors, he was thrown into a severe, life-threatening withdrawal, including kindling and many other factors, and cold turkey and all kinds of stuff that he went through. As so many of us have been, he has been shocked by the lack of medical training. He found resources online to help support that. He decided, after collecting a lot of information and learning everything he could, that he could do a podcast. And he started with a podcast in Dutch. But then he had some people that were English speaking and suggested he do one English speaking, and he started doing that one, and that became Benzo Tired. Naftal's podcast includes his journey of coming off benzos, how he found information, where he went, topics while researching benzodiazepines and learning about the drugs, in addition to what he referred to as meeting heroes along the way. Naftal's going to tell you a lot more about himself. We're going to start off with that. So let's just go ahead and dive right into this conversation and join myself and Naftal on an interview we recorded just last week. Thanks. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is Dee, and we are here at the Benzo Free Podcast. And today I have a guest. This is Naftal Benisty from Benzo Tired podcast. Welcome, Naftal.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's great to have you on the podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation. For most of you aren't aware that Naftal and I talked about a week or two ago, and 2 hours later, we finally decided we had to hang up and go do other things. It just kept going and going. And so it was great to get to know you and great to get that conversation. And I look forward to what you can share with our listeners here on the podcast today. So thank you again for taking the time to meet with us.
Sure.
I want to start out like I start out with everybody, which is first, tell me just a bit about yourself, what you were doing, and then we'll move into the benzo story and see where that's at. Okay.
Sure. Well, I used to be a social worker. That's what I did for a living, and I was doing pretty all right. I was married, bought a house. I had a pretty simple life, and I was happy, and I was healthy. And in 2016, I went to the US for the first time in my life, which I really wanted to do. That was the thing on my bucket list.
Where'd you go?
California for about 3 weeks, and I loved it. I fell in love. So it was really a great vacation. And I think we came back June 2016. And then I got Lyme disease in the summer. So in my own country. And that was a pretty big health scare to me. I was really scared. And I got symptoms and I had that bullseye and, all the signs were there.
Right.
So I went to my GP, I got antibiotics and all seemed well. And then I think about 2 weeks later, I got tinnitus really bad. And that resulted into like really bad insomnia. I couldn't sleep. I was in panic. I didn't know what tinnitus actually was. Yeah, both ears, just a loud banshee, a loud banshee in my head screaming. It's a bad one. I have really bad tinnitus. Currently now, luckily I'm okay with it, but at the time it's like, what is this? I couldn't sleep. I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know exactly what tinnitus was, and I was kind of hoping it would go away. Tried to keep the show on the road, working, all of that stuff. And I think I went to a drugstore and just got some like herbal stuff, trying to help me sleep because I'd never had insomnia before that happened. And I really didn't want to go to the GP and I didn't want to have pills or prescriptions or anything, but I became so desperate. So desperately, I went to my GP and he prescribed me several benzodiazepines to try. And I didn't really know the concept of benzodiazepines. I just thought I was getting a pill to get some sleep. And so my benzo journey began in 2016, and I was on a short-acting benzodiazepine for a couple of months. That isn't even, how you say that? It's only allowed in the Netherlands and another country, so it's not, you guys won't have it. It's called lormetazepam. That's the generic name. A very short-acting benzo. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't actually helping me a lot with sleep, so I would sleep for 2 hours, take another pill, and then another 2 hours, take another pill. I had no clue about benzos and potency. So lormetazepam is about 10 times more potent than Valium or diazepam, which I had no idea about. So during this time, I was like, this is not viable. I don't want to be on these pills. I'm still sleeping very poorly. So I really sought help for my tinnitus. Long story short, I didn't get the help that I needed. I got a diagnosis and learn how to live with it. Goodbye.
Right.
But I'm pretty certain I was pretty much physically dependent by then on the benzodiazepines. And then in 2017, all of a sudden, this lormetazepam is no longer available, out of stock. I'm like, okay, I'm panicky because I need something to sleep. And I got switched to a long-acting benzodiazepine, brand name Delmain, generic name flurazepam.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is a miracle drug. It was like, oh, I'm finally sleeping again. And I really thought I was getting a pill for sleep. And I thought, because of my tinnitus, okay, I have a condition, tinnitus, don't know how to, live with that without sleeping pills. So I thought I was going to, use them for the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah. So when did you realize that this was a serious problem or causing, that the medication was causing most of your symptoms and things that were going on in your life?
Interestingly, that took me a very, very long time because I think I never really got physical symptoms until I started to taper.
Mm-hmm.
But I was tired all the time. I was like, I had like chronic fatigue and it just kept getting worse and worse. So in 2019 or 2020, I can't remember exactly, I went to a psychologist like, hey, I'm tired all the time. And I've got this thing called tinnitus and I don't know how to cope. I don't know how to deal. She didn't look at my, she didn't ask about any prescription drugs that I was using. So I got this diagnosis like, oh, you have chronic fatigue syndrome, something.
Right.
Learn how to live with your fatigue and, good luck with that. And then I think I realized that the drug wasn't working anymore. I wasn't really sure, what benzodiazepine withdrawal intolerance or any of that was, but I was like, I need something else to replace this drug.
Mm-hmm.
So I called my GP and I said, I heard about Z drugs. Maybe you can give me a Z drug. So I take the Z drug, quick cold turkey with the benzos, high dose, by the way, 90 milligrams.
Yeah. Wow.
And after a week, I get into full blast psychosis. And then even then, it took me like in this kind of like psychotic break that I was having, it took me a couple of hours to realize like, hey, I switched a drug that must be causing this. Then I go back on the drug and then I realize something is wrong and it's maybe related to the drugs. But even then I wasn't really comprehending that it was all the benzos causing all of that.
Yeah, it takes most of us a while. I know for me too, it was actually, for me, it wasn't even until a new primary care physician told me to take Prozac, and I said, why? She said, well, that's what help you come off of your clonazepam. And I didn't even know I needed to come off of my clonazepam. I've been on it for 12 years. And so that's when I went and started looking onto the internet. And of course, that night I had a severe panic attack when I saw what I saw. And that was my journey. So mine happened rapidly. Because it's suddenly I just looked things up, and I never thought to look before. I never thought this drug I'd been taking for 12 years was, and in hindsight, I see that I was starting to get some tolerance symptoms. I just didn't know what they were. So, that happens. But yeah, for some people, it's a very slow realization. For others, it happens overnight. It can be crazy.
It took me a really, really long time. So what happened once I had my psychotic break, I reinstate. I never knew of these terms, later on. But to reinstate, I think that was the best thing that I could have done. So the Z drug is like, okay, the Z drug's not working. So I threw that away. I was like, okay, that's not helpful at all. I'm just staying clear from the Z drug. And I actually go and seek help again. And after 5 years of being tired and dealing with my tinnitus, everything, I finally find a clinic in my country that is specialized in giving cognitive behavioral therapy for tinnitus and sleep. I didn't even know that they existed. I mean, I had looked, but they kind of go under a name for, in Dutch, like for deaf and people that have hearing loss. When you have tinnitus, you are not necessarily deaf, or you don't have necessarily hearing loss. So I would never have found that. Anyway, so that's like 5 years into this journey with benzos. And it was kind of 5 years too late, but still very welcome. And then I get the cognitive behavioral therapy and I learn that there's no such thing as a pill for sleep. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, okay, well, I think, and with the cognitive behavioral therapy, which was really helpful, I was like, you know what? I think over the past few years, the tinnitus bit, I think I've learned how to cope with that. I think I have this thing, inhibituation or something they call it. I think I'm okay with my tinnitus, and I think I'm ready to come off of these drugs and just, try to sleep on my own. And I think I did kind of gather that if I was going to quit the drugs or taper or something, that I would have some rebound insomnia, something like that. And at that place, the psychiatrist there tried to taper me off very rapidly. It did not go well at all. No. I stopped sleeping altogether. I became intensely depressed, and I felt very strange. I thought it was the lack of sleep that was causing me to be so depressed. Maybe that was a factor. It was just going too fast, and I gave up. It was undoable, intolerable, and I again reinstated. So there's a lot of kindling in my story, by the way. So that psychiatrist, like, I can't help you. I'm going to forward you to an addiction facility. I went there and I was like, oh, wow, an addiction facility? That's kind of intense, you know? That's kind of intense. But I went, and in between, I did something very stupid. It was so silly because we do have insert pamphlets, but they just say gradual.
Yeah.
Gradually come off. Like, what's gradual?
What does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So what I did, I was like, oh, I guess I was kind of scared to go to an addiction facility. So I thought maybe I can try it on my own again. And I cut my dose from 90 milligrams of flurazepam to 30 in 2 days.
Wow.
And I could not do another step. Like from 30 to 15, I got so deathly ill. I was like, oh, this is scary. So I'm not going to go down to 30 until I get to this addiction facility. But I was already having these strange symptoms like little seizures and tremors. And I was like, oh, maybe this is part of the territory. And kind of desperate. And I went into this addiction facility to please help me get off these drugs. I'm really struggling. I don't know what's wrong with me. Why can't I come off this, And I was very specific with the addiction specialist, as he calls himself. Like, look, I've tapered. Last month, I was on 90 milligrams of flurazepam. I've been on this kind of high dose for a couple of years. I'm on 30 now. I'm really struggling to go down to 15. So, or just 0. So help me out. And he said, well, sure, I'm going to give you 15 milligrams of Valium or diazepam. I'm like, oh, wait, I had that the first attempt. That didn't go very well. Are there alternatives? And then he was like, yeah, I can give you Ativan. I didn't know anything. I really trusted this, I was like, really, okay, I'll try it. So he gives me the Ativan. I'm supposed to instantly switch. And I just had the strangest week. I was I was going mad. I wasn't sleeping. I was very sick. So I was like, this is not going to work. This is not going to work. So I came back a week later. I was like, dude, just give me the Valium because this is not working. And then he gave me the 50 milligrams of Valium and I tried it for 2 days. I got high. For the first time in this benzo journey, I got high in a bad way, feeling very sick. He told me to instantly switch, no crossing over. So I tried it for about 2 days. I got really sick and I was like, I'm done with this. I just want to be free of this pill. So I went cold turkey. And that, I think that was doable for a couple of days. And I thought, I have willpower and, I'll just do this and maybe I'll be sick for a week or 2. I was like, I'll do this in a month. I was so naive. And then I almost died. I had grand mal seizures after a couple of days.
You were talking when you had the conversation the other day. You were talking about the seizures. Go talk a little bit about that because it's not common. It's rare, but it does happen, especially in the acute phases. But you've had some that have lingered, and I haven't heard that as much. And I'm really curious to know what that's like and what your experiences have been.
Yeah, so it is an interesting topic, and I've discussed it with some of my doctors that I've seen or psychiatrists. I've even looked it up, information. What is a seizure? They have definitions of seizures. There's the tonic and the clonic, and there's a whole variety of seizures. The thing with me is I'm always conscious when it happens.
Okay.
So I'm aware. Mostly when people have grand mal seizures, they're kind of out of it, and I'm aware. The only thing is I can't talk. I'm just spasming extremely. All of my muscles, everything's out of control, and I can't talk. I'm living the moment, but I can't speak. I can't talk.
It's like the worst combination, horrible. Isn't it? Yeah. For you to be conscious, horrible. But you have zero control over what's happening.
Yep. It's pretty horrific.
Yeah. So how often have you had those?
Oh, a lot. I had them a lot. I think the biggest one was when I went cold turkey. That was by far the biggest and scariest one. And I really, in combination with like a heart attack or just very, very extremely rapid heartbeat. And that was like 3 days. I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna, I knew I was dying. I felt it like I'm not going to survive this. So I was, pretty lost at the time. And I was like, okay, so what do? I think I have to instate a benzo. I have to take a benzo. And I was like, okay, so the addiction specialist told me 15 milligrams of Valium. Let me meet him halfway and I'll just take 7. I'll just take 7. And that did help. But that kind of resulted into me staying on 7 for a while and cutting to 6 and 5 within a couple of 3 months. And I was just that was my acute withdrawal. And I had seizures constantly, like twice a week. Maybe God. Not as intense, but I had seizures the whole time.
How are they now?
The last time that I had it was 2 months ago. I was lower on the benzos than I'm now. I was on 4 milligrams of Valium then. Now I'm on 5. But that was one time, and then before it, the time before that one, it was a couple of months before that. So it's not as intense as it was, and I haven't had seizures in a while now. So it's been a while.
In our conversation before, and I noticed one of your podcast episodes, something that somebody was talking about holding infinitely on a certain dosage. Do you feel like maybe that's where you're at now, or do you still think you're going to taper down as you move on? And maybe explain what you're talking about when you refer to.
Right. So the indefinite hold. I read a book last year. It was a new book, and I read the book, and I was kind of baffled. Like I was in the zone of benzo buddies and benzo world. Like we're all trying to get to 0. and I was deathly ill, and I knew by then that I had gone way too fast. Read this book, and I was like, who wants to hold indefinitely on a benzo? We all want to come off right. But then I read the book, and it just made sense for this person. And yes, I think I've come to the point now where I'm indefinitely holding. I'm never saying never. I'm just saying not now.
With the person that you're talking about with the indefinite hold, do you believe that, I mean, I think the question is here is that, is it going to catch up with you? Is tolerance going to, take hold and be pretty strong? Is that really a long-term solution? What are your thoughts on that?
It could possibly happen. I
Yeah.
know that there's people on the planet that take a benzo for the rest of their lives and they seem fine. I think with benzos, I think my lesson is anything can happen. You're always taking a calculated risk by holding indefinitely. It's not something that you would want. I don't want to promote or anything. I think
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, I think for now, in this moment, in this time, I think I'm going to hold for a year and then try again.
And that makes sense. And that's one of the things I try to focus on is we always encourage people, not encourage, but we always try to refer to them to the, common thoughts, which is a slow taper, to come off the drug entirely when you can. But you also have to have, a realistic expectation. For some people, that's just not something they can do right now. For some people, the symptoms are too strong. For some people, this is going to take a long time. You might even look at the indefinite hold as part of a very slow taper.
Definitely.
Pausing. I paused it. I updosed at one point during my taper, panic attack, out of town, on work kind of thing. And I then paused for a while at that. When I updosed a little bit, I stayed at that level for another like 4 or 5 months, I think, before I started to go down. So that might be seen kind of as an indefinite hold. And I think maybe if you look at it from the point of view of it's holding until you feel comfortable taking the next step. And that might be a year. It depends on where you're at. Then it totally makes sense. And I think that fits in with common theory on tapering. So I think that fits. So yeah, I can see that. I don't recommend indefinite holds because eventually it might catch up with you. But if you need to take it very slowly to where you pause for a while, absolutely. And to each their own. That's one thing.
I would have to say that my taper was extremely messy from day one, and I'm very much
all over
kindled.
the place. Yeah,
it is all over the place, and not because I chose that at all.
No,
I mean,
God,
I just
no.
wasn't informed. And what was really shocking to me that I was in acute withdrawal. I had tapered from 7 to 5 milligrams of Valium in like 2 or 3 months because I just wanted to come off, and I was just so sick the whole time. And then at some point I was like, there's something not right. I am so sick. I'm having all these I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I couldn't think. The lights were too bright, the whole thing. But I was really, really sick. I could not think
constant
at all.
hyperarousal where everything influences you in the world. I know.
Yeah. And I remember asking my addiction specialist at the time before going into the taper, like, what kind of withdrawal symptoms can I expect? And he said some blurry vision. Period. That was it. So when I couldn't walk and I couldn't talk, and I communicated this to him. I was like, first I said, like, I went cold turkey. I was like, good for you. And then I was like, oh, I think I will die if I do this cold turkey. So I'm going to go on 7. And he made really strange comments. Like, you're taking an awful long time to come off of the benzos. And
it's amazing they're in the medical
it is
community.
crazy.
I know.
And then it's February 2022, and I'm like, something just doesn't add up. It's not adding up here. I'm too sick. This is inhumane. And I start opening my computer, and I start looking, and I was like, what do I even look for? Oh, this is a benzodiazepine. And then I find a book, then I find the Ashton manual. And mind you, I was just cognitively very much impaired. Yeah. And then I saw, the Ashton manual. I see the headshot of someone in the 80s. I'm like, what's an Ashton manual? And then just, my heart dropped. Like, this is me. She's describing me. And then I knew that I was onto something. And then I really needed a long time to research everything that was going on with me because of my symptoms, barely sleeping and all of that. But I learned along the way that I should have been, well, first of all, it should have been an option to cross over to Valium.
Yeah, and substitution doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work for everybody. So it's not the best,
100%, 100%. So I figured out along the way that I was supposed to be given the equivalent of 90 milligrams of flurazepam, according to the ASHA manual. There's like more equivalency things
Right.
out there, like Clean Calc. But I think the ASHA manual states 45 milligrams of Valium. That's
Okay.
where I should have started at instead of 7
Yeah.
or 15. And the Clean Calc is just very broad. And I think the upper range of that is 120 milligrams of Valium.
Yeah, I'm just glad that you're here doing what you're doing today. So in fact, let's transition to that. So
Yeah.
first of all, how are you doing now? Where are you at? What are you currently on? And what's your current state and how are you doing right now?
I'm currently on 5 milligrams of Valium.
Awesome. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. I was lower on the Valium, but I was just getting, the seizures. Definitely. So I'm very stable. I'll have my occasional bad day. For me, the symptoms are mostly or almost everything is physical with me.
Okay, we are back now. We had a few technical difficulties and then more technical difficulties and a few more technical but I think we're back now. Just so everybody knows, I was trying to record video and audio, but we had some resource limitations on the computers and we got some warnings. So anyway, we came back and we're just recording audio only going forward and probably make the whole thing audio only. Just so everybody knows, but we're going to make this work. So I'm back here with Naftal, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your podcast. I wanted to transition now into what got you the idea for doing a podcast on benzodiazepines. How did that get started, and how's that going for you?
Right. So when I got really sick and when I discovered the ASHA manual, I just wanted to know so much more about benzos and I wanted to learn about it. And I actually looked for podcasts and I found Geraldine Burns's podcast. What was the first podcast that I found? And I listened to it and thank goodness my English is okay. So I was like, oh, I can understand all of this. And I felt so validated and all these people went through the same thing that I was going through. And it was so helpful. So I was like, maybe, that was a few months after that. I was like, I guess the feeling was I want to warn the world. I want to educate the world. And
Right.
I was like, I have to do something. I want to do something back for the community. And, so I just looked into how to make a podcast. And originally I started Dutch, but at the time I was also on Benzo Buddies and some American friends that I had on the, where I was talking to on Benzo Buddies were like, hey, that's really cool that you're starting a podcast, but maybe you can do it in English. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. So very organically, I was like, okay, just Googled how do I make a podcast and really learned on how to make the episodes. And I really started off with just my story. And then it's really my kind of journey through this whole benzo thing. Like what is crossing over and why are people struggling with that? What is bind? At that point, I'm finding D.E. Foster and I'm finding your podcast. Like, why didn't I find this before? So all the topics that kind of a benzo noob will find in this journey, I'm like, I just want to share that with the world.
Yeah.
And I never thought, I really thought like maybe it's cool for a couple of, benzo buddies to check in on the podcast and maybe they'll learn a thing or two. And then as time progressed, I had a friend of mine come up on the show who was tapering at the time. She's off now. And then more people came on the show and then it just, it became more of a platform for other people to come on. And I have to say the making the podcast series during withdrawal was a gift because it kept me busy.
Yes.
It felt something that I could do for the community because I would have these days where I was really sick and kind of dysfunctional, but then I'd have okay days and I was able to record. And it was just a gift because I met some really awesome people making the podcast series and it's such a gift. And I mean, it just means the world to me. I mean, so many people are harmed by benzodiazepines. It's such an international problem too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's so many books written about it. And there's just, I learned a lot from other podcasts, like for your podcast series and, people that came on your show and your personal story and everything. I was like, this is what really helped me, listening to other people, knowing what I'm going through.
Right.
So if I can give that back, that's the biggest
amazing.
gift.
I love the way you speak about that and the love you have for what you're doing. And it was the same thing for me because I've said many times on the podcast that doing the podcast saved me because just like you shared, it's like that, those connections, talking with people, emailing with people, hearing from them, sharing their stories kept me going. It saved me. And I love that because it was some of the things I think we needed to do this so we could get through this.
Definitely. It's a two-way stream, really.
It is. It really is. It's one of those great things in life where it's beneficial on both sides, and that's amazing.
Yeah, and I'm just very grateful to you as well
Oh, well,
for
thank
making
you.
your podcast series.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed listening to a lot of your episodes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I've been listening to some of yours lately too. I know you told me about the Haeley and Tom once. I went back and started checking that episode out, and really well done. And that was a great story to hear about both of them. And I think a lot of the stories, I know you had Christy Huff on,
Yeah.
who is a colleague of mine. In fact, we had lunch just yesterday. Um, she was in town, and so, but just always good to hear the different takes, because I hear when they're on mine, but you always get different feedback on other podcasts. So I hear a different take on some of the people I've worked with and some of the people that I haven't worked with. But it's different on different podcasts because you ask different questions and you have a different rapport with them, and so you get a little bit of in-depth areas on things that I wouldn't think to bring up. And I think that's fascinating. I've noticed that on your podcast is you have insight into different areas than I do. And I love that because it brings out more information and newer information.
Well, I think we just learn so much from each other because you
Yeah.
have this episode where you had Anna Lemke on,
Yeah.
and the way that you kind of educate her, where she's like, "Oh, I didn't think of that. That's a good one. I'll consider that." Like you're telling about your personal story where you basically find out that the benzos are harming you, and you go to your prescriber, like, "I want to come off," and he actually tells you to hold for a while before you
Right.
start.
Right.
And that was so interesting to me. I'm like, that is actually something that doctors can consider telling their
Yeah.
patients, if the circumstances are there. And she was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." I was like so impressed with you impressing her, and it was
Well,
just in awe.
that's why I love her. That's why she's so amazing. And so many of the doctors I work with are amazing because they're the ones that are willing to listen to us and know that we can teach them things too. My co-chair at the Benzodiazepine Action Work Group is Dr. Alexis Ridvo. And one of the things that she and Dr. Stephen Wright were originally the founders, we all founded the organization, but they were the original co-chairs. And when Stephen retired, he said he wanted a lived experience person in there to be the other co-chair along with Dr. Ritvo. And that became myself. And I love that because these are the people that get that, hey, we bring a lot to the table. We've lived through this. We know what it's like. We've worked with thousands of people who are going through it. We bring knowledge. And so then I started working with BIC, and I started working with the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices and other organizations who are lived experience founded. They're founded by lived experience people, but they've created organizations of medical professionals and lived experience together. And that's one of the great things about Christy Huff is that she's actually both. She's a
Yeah.
cardiologist and lived experience with Xanax.
Yeah.
So, I think it's that partnership is where we're seeing the biggest difference, is because we're working with the doctors, especially the ones who are open to knowing what we went through, and we bring some to the table. And when I had that conversation with Dr. Lemke, it was great because, she said, wow, I never thought about having somebody stabilize for 6 months before we start the taper. And it wasn't my idea, it was my doctor's idea, but I was just passing it on to her. But she that's what I loved about her, is she was willing to listen to that and say, hey, I might incorporate that at my practice. And I said, oh, well, great.
That is awesome. I think, there's a wealth of information, of life stories where we can all learn from each other.
Exactly.
And, honestly, you guys are doing awesome work, because I found your YouTube video on Bind, and I'd never heard of Bind before that. I was like, this is freaking amazing.
Oh,
this
thanks.
we need. And the
Yeah.
way that you guys explain it, I was like, this is it. This is what we are. This is a better name than benzo withdrawal, or
Well, we had so many names, and that was the problem.
Yeah.
We had about 20 different names on our research out there that were all defining the same condition. And then in the survey results, we found actual evidence of a separate withdrawal pattern that was separate from acute withdrawal those first 30 days. And so that they actually are different. And it's more of this neuroadaptation, neurotoxicity thing that happens that creates this long-term protracted effect. but it's different than acute withdrawal. And finding that difference is what created Bind. And that's where they got the doctors together and started talking through it and figuring out terminology and what it looks like. And yeah, our third paper is probably coming out in the next month. And that one actually fully defines Bind and formally presents it. So
Yeah.
we're really close to having it all out there and getting hopefully some media about that and getting that more publicized. So
Yeah, and look in kind of my research, because I felt like my journalist is born, my inner journalist. I'm gonna research all of this, and then I'm not really sure if you had any part of that, but that I find the Colorado Consortium,
yep,
the Deprescribing Guidelines. I'm like,
yes, we did those.
wow, like why is this is so good? Like
yeah, we're
this is
trying
magic.
to get those. Yeah, it was actually when we created the Benzo Action Work Group at the consortium. Our first task was creating 3 documents: prescribing, deprescribing, and peer support. I was on the peer support team because that was my expertise. And so I worked on that, whereas like Alexis, Dr. Ritvo, and Dr. Huff, they were working on some other ones. I think one of them worked on, the deprescribing, one worked on prescribing. But yeah, they're great. And now they're public and they're free and people can go look at it. Some documented information. We have references in it. It's, several physicians are involved with each one. So we have a lot of medical background too. And I think they're good documents to use, and we just keep building on that. And I think other sites too, like the Alliance site and Big site, also have amazing documentation.
Definitely.
And our resources. If people haven't been there, check those out. Check out my site, Easing Anxiety. I have a lot on my site. Check BIC at benzoinfo.com and check the Alliance at benzoreform.org. By far, just those 2 organizations always surprise me with new work and new progress they're making, and they're doing a lot of great stuff. So
I think I found a lot of great things, but everything that I found was in the US.
yeah,
None of that in
it
Europe.
does seem
None
to
of it.
it's shifted because with Ashton it was
Yeah.
UK for a while. Like when I first got started, it seemed like UK was a little ahead, and Ireland had a lot of progress too on realizing the damage of benzodiazepines. But Irish also ran into some problem. Ireland ran into some problems because they tried to curtail access to benzos too quickly. And they wound up in a big problem of deprescribing and not having the drugs available for deprescribing, for people tapering. So there's been some downturn, and I think, but in the UK, you got Baylis over there, who's just amazing and always rock solid, working there with several organizations. But I think in the last few years, Geraldine was huge. Sonia was huge. So many people over here really kind of got things moving, and people bought in. And then you got JC over at BIC, and she and Christy got that thing kicked off and running, and then Bernie Silvernail at the Alliance, and just all the pieces kind of came together. I got mine started with the podcast and stuff, and it does seem like it was a perfect storm, and everything now is coming together and gelling, and we're making a difference, and we kind of figured out how to make a difference and how to get this to happen. And so yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, and
So
I love connecting to each and every one, trying to make a difference. I've really connected to some really cool people in the UK, people that were harmed. They're trying to make documentaries.
oh yeah,
They're setting up websites. So I really feel like, I'm not out of the woods yet, but I feel like if we all combine forces, we should be able to
exactly. And that's what we're doing, and
change something.
that's what I love, finding people like yourself. Like I've had a different coaches on recently, and I've had some other people, and I'm finding new people who have been out there for a while. I just didn't know about it. Just like you said, you found Geraldine but didn't know about my podcast. We find little pieces along the way.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you realize, oh my God, here's somebody out here with 2,000 followers on a YouTube channel, and they're doing all this stuff, and it's really good sound advice. And it's like, oh well, let me reach out and say hi. But there's somebody we don't know. And so when I, came across your stuff a little while back, and then we started chatting and we had a good conversation, and it was like, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. He's got some great people on there. And then I saw you had Christy on. It's like, well, I got to get over there to talk to this guy. So it's like,
Yeah.
And it's been great since then. Because, it's you're one of those people that I think we could sit down and have a 5-hour conversation straight and still not want to stop yet.
For sure. And I think one of the, because I tend to be on the positive side, even though I went through hell. Yeah, and I think the positive thing is I'm seeing a lot of vigor, if that's the right word. I think there are people now that are like, this is not okay. This is 2023. This should not have happened to me. And now with social media, and we can have whole discussions about the pros and cons about social media, but now that we have it, we kind of we can utilize that social media platform to really, get the word out. Because I think, if I'll speak for myself, I'm like, I'm not going to wait until the government, we don't have a black box warning like you guys. We don't. So if in order for us to change, it has to be from the bottom to the top. So
Yeah. Well, and that's how we got the warning. Is actually those organizations I was talking about. A lot of them reached out to the FDA. It was grassroots that got that moving and got that warning on there. So this is how it happens. Is exactly what
yeah,
you're talking about. But yeah, we do need to get that as be more of an international type of realization, so that other places have those warnings too. Because that has been a key over here. While the downside, which we're learning recently, because we're just starting to do some initial studies on the effect of that FDA warning. But one of the downsides we're seeing in some of that research is few physicians read the warning. There's not really a good communication protocol for informing acting medical professionals about updated information on drugs. There's just not. It's that there's little pieces out there, and there's CME, and there's different, but I think the CME is probably, which is continuing medical education, is probably our best, because like in this country, they're required to take some of that every year to keep your license. And so,
right.
and we've just created some benzodiazepine videos on that, and certified CME classes that we did. And so that can help. But when that box warning comes out, a lot of physicians don't even know it exists. And that's the downside. It's like it's there,
Right.
but there's no real good mechanism for communicating that to physicians, saying, hey, by the way, benzodiazepines, you want to be careful about prescribing them, and here's why.
Yeah, I think for me, because I can talk for hours, but I think what I really missed in my insert pamphlet, still, it doesn't set a time frame. It says your
Right.
doctor will tell you how long to use it.
Yeah, I know. It's and most and far too many medical professionals still believe that you can be on it the rest of your life with no problems.
Right.
And
I actually had an interesting conversation with one of my psychiatrists who wasn't gaslighting me. So she was believing me. She was like, oh, you really
okay.
provided the information, and whatever you need, we'll do that. So that was really cool, and very blessed to have it. But she actually she said to me recently, like, I believe that diazepam or Valium is, suitable for certain anxiety disorders. I'm like, no, just
Yeah.
no. Like long term. Like, no,
Long
just,
term's the problem right there. Yeah.
it's like, no, just no.
I know. Yeah, just
But
just no. Yeah, it's like,
yeah,
yeah,
just
we
no.
go back in our country to Nancy Reagan of just say no,
Yeah, yeah,
but and you and I both agree. It's like we also know, yeah, benzos are needed for certain things, but it's
definitely.
very
Yeah,
limited. It should be very short term. I mean, ER physicians need it when an agitated person comes into the ER room. You can't treat the person unless you can calm them down. Well, a shot of Versed, midazolam really quickly calms that person down. We can be treated. Absolutely needed for that. It's needed for
yep,
alcohol detox. It's needed for seizures sometimes. But there's very little reason for long-term treatment with benzodiazepines. Very little, efficacy proven that really does any good for people. So, most of the effects of benzodiazepines wear off in the first 30 to 45 days. After
yep,
that, you're now moving into dependence. If not
yeah.
well before that. So,
Yeah, I think that's very shocking because, I mean, we know Christie's story,
yep,
but I actually came across some other stories where people were just on it for a couple of weeks or months, and then they,
yeah,
got so sick, just after short-term use already. So even with, I mean, the FDA stated on the black box warning, it can happen within a matter of days, and
exactly.
that it
It
does
can.
happen.
It does. It does, and it's scary. Hey, let's jump into your podcast for a little bit here.
Sure.
I quickly mentioned the Haeley and Tom episode. I was wondering if you could
Yeah.
talk on that, because you mentioned that to me before too when we were having our conversation, and what you learned from that, and why that was so instrumental for you and your podcast. Why that was such an effective episode.
Right. Well, so many reasons. First, meeting Haeley was very special because she has a very a positive Instagram page. I think it's called Benzo Positivity or
Yep.
Benzo Withdrawal Positivity. I was like, oh, this is so refreshing. from all the other stuff that I'm seeing online, it can get pretty dark. So I just DM'd her. I didn't know if it was a him or her, no name. I was like, thank you so much for, creating this page, and hope you're well. So we started talking and chatting. And so we got acquainted, and she introduced herself as Haeley, and I was talking about the podcast, and she actually was listening to my podcast, and I got some good feedback, and we were talking, and at some point I was like, there's some topics that I still want to touch on, and one of them is having a partner on the show, someone in it with the partner or a wife or a husband, and talk to that person. And she was like, well, my husband is, we would want to be on, and he's a professional podcaster. I'm like, really? Oh, okay, cool. Sure. And then she, something was happening with her taper. So she, they got COVID.
Right. Okay.
So that kind of sucks when that happens. So kind of forgot about it. Then she reached out again. We set it up, and it was such a beautiful recording. And he's so good. He's so strong, and he's explaining it so well. And he's such a champ when it comes to helping her during this benzo withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so amazing. And then he gave me some valuable tips in terms of podcasting. Afterwards, like the post show, like it's not on the episode, but we wrap up, and then like with you and me last time, like we stay chatting, and it's really fun. But it was just, I thought it was very powerful to have a partner on and just describing his wife disappearing, seeing his wife disappear, the horrible things, and then just picking up everything, bringing the kids to school. And then, she's on, and she's still like amidst the taper, 50 milligrams of Valium she was at the time, I think. So pretty symptomatic. So brave, both of them, so brave. I was like so in awe. There are caregivers that really do want to help.
Yeah, how is your partner? Remind me your partner's name again. I'm sorry.
Frank.
Okay, so remind me how Frank handled that, and has he shared with you kind of how it's been?
I think it really got to him. Because we both went into these meetings with the psychiatrist and asked, and we were both trusting in them. But then me getting the seizures, and I got really dark, and so I got really, really dark. And then a few days later that would pass. But I think it's so taxing. I think it traumatized him as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
However, he's been with me on this journey. He's totally like cheering me on to do the podcast series. He's just such a good team player. He just gives me all the space to do what I need to do. Well, especially in acute withdrawal, he fed me. He even stayed at home from work, stayed in from work just to take care of me, or because he was very worried that something might have happened. So he really sacrificed a lot, but it really did take a toll on him. But we talk about it, we process it together.
And honestly, you and I are both very blessed then, because we had a support. I know so many people who don't have that, and I'm sure you've run across so many people who don't have that. And that is
Definitely.
So huge for what we go through, to have that person that is your rock, is always there. It loves you, unconditionally, and it's not going anywhere. Man.
And he really advocated for me too when I needed him to, because I remember I had this one appointment with my psychiatrist, and I had to come in that day, and I was having a seizure, so I obviously wasn't going to show up. And then my Frank calls the psychiatrist, and she's like, I thought he was okay. Well, no, he's not. He's having seizures.
Yeah, he's just having a seizure. Don't worry about it.
So the psychiatrists don't understand that you can have really intense waves. Anything can happen. I mean, my seizures are pretty kind of rare, I guess, but still it is possible. Anything is possible in a benzo taper. So he really advocated for me when I needed, and especially in the beginning when I there were days I could not formulate sentences. I was in really bad shape. So then he would do that for me, or just say, this is what I'm seeing happening. He's not sleeping. He's not eating. He's losing weight fast. So he was really advocating for me. And I just having him as my support, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to make the podcast series. He's really like, I don't know how to make a podcast episode series, and you're the one that's knows your benzos. You go do that, and go help save the world, as you will. You do your thing, advocate, spread awareness. So he's really cool. I'm kind of at the crossroads where I will always keep making until I, a certain age or whatever. I love doing this, and I will do this even if I would get a job. That's kind of where the crossroads I'm at. Because if I didn't have to worry a lot about income, I'm not worrying a lot. But if income was not a thing, if I'd be rich, like example, I just wanted to do full-time benzo awareness stuff all the
I love it.
4 days.
Yeah.
I just want to go to like GP offices and pharmacies and trying to spread the word. Maybe even go travel Europe and try to spread the word. And I really hope at some point I'll be able to connect all the the people that are really advocating for the cause. I met this wonderful lady, for example, in the UK, in London, but it's like one region, a borough they call it.
Okay.
Her name is Melanie Davis. I had her on the show, and she's wasn't harmed by benzos herself, but she did see it in a like personal environment. And she's been advocating for the cause for like 30 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
And she has a support group, and she advocates for the patients by, writing letters, and she's working with a psychiatrist, and also like basically what you guys are doing, but like very regional in London. I'm like, there's like I said, there's a wealth of wisdom. There's a wealth of people with lived experience. If we all just utilize this, And I think, I'm still kind of amidst withdrawal in a way, even though I paused it. So I'm really stable. But and with the COVID thing, I've been blessed that I haven't gotten COVID yet. But in my country, in the Netherlands, there are coming documentaries on TV. They're finding people with long COVID that are just unable to work and have some issues. But when you hear them describing their symptoms, brain fog,
isn't it funny?
It's like, this sounds like benzos. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. And I think I just want to thank you on behalf of the whole community, and for making your podcast series.
Oh, well, thank you.
And for being so loyal, because I know that I can always expect an episode not far from the future.
Thank you.
And something else that I wanted to share with you, because when I first found Geraldine Burns' podcast, and then I found yours, and you have like a history, it's I think the episodes go way back, So even if you're not getting feedback now, there may be someone 5 years from now that is going to find your podcast, and you're going to validate and save that person. So even if the numbers are not there now,
you're probably getting it now. You're on like what, 35 or something like that. So you're probably starting to get some feedback from 1, 2, and 3 that you did a while ago, and And
I remember when I was in Benzo Buddies, and then someone from Belgium, and they speak Dutch too. So in kind of its own kind of Dutch, and he was like, I really appreciate your podcast. So they were messaging me through Benzo Buddies, because I guess they found my handle or whatnot. So I've gotten good feedback, and I'm just trying to do my best. I'm still in withdrawal, so I'm like, I'm just winging it, and I'm learning as I go.
I think we had this conversation earlier when we just had that chat on the phone, but I think it's interesting, because I think being still in it is what in part makes our podcast effective. I'm still in it 8 years out, and I just had this big wave come through after COVID and everything else. You're still in it. You're still tapering, still figuring out your next step.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that people that are fully healed aren't good podcasters in the benzo world, but there's something about the relational, the again, I can't think of the right word, but people can relate to us because we're still in it, and we're reminded of it. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, it's relatable. Yeah, definitely. And sometimes I have to be honest, sometimes I was a little bit scared, because I really thought like a few people may listen, and I wasn't expecting a lot at first. But I was like, what if I get really severe symptoms, and what if it doesn't go well? And I was kind of, oh, what do I do? And I'm just honest.
Exactly.
I always, when I make a personal taper episode, I always do it when I'm stable. Always do that when I'm stable. But I will be honest. I'm like, I went through a really rough patch.
And that's a balance I think you and I both have to find, which is, being honest, but also being somewhat positive. And that's always the kind of tricky thing, because, it's easy for, like, when I talked about that last the long COVID thing and kicking off a new wave, I got some feedback. And people were just really disappointed and stuff like that, because it sounded like, well, God, you're 8 years out and now you're having this problem. It's like, okay, so I also have to go back and add the caveats in of going, look, I'm always going to be honest with you and share with you what I'm going through. At the same point, I am still significantly better than I've ever been. There's other circumstances that affected my well-being and caused this, like long COVID and other things. So, but so often the people that listen to us think that will be me. I know for
Right.
sure 8 years out, I'm going to still, be in the middle of this. And it's like, no, most likely you won't. All the odds are in your favor that you won't be anything like me. All the odds are in your favor.
Yeah.
You won't be like you kindled, had multiple drugs,
Yep.
cold turkey. You did everything you're not supposed to do because you didn't know
Yes.
better,
Yes.
and so that's going to make it harder for you. So,
Yep.
for those people that aren't doing the things we did wrong, yeah, you're
Yep.
most likely going to have a better path,
Yep. And I would also say, because I know how dark it can get, and I know how sick people can get,
Yes.
but that is not eternal. That will end. That will get better. In the end, it does get better. So I think, I
Absolutely.
always kind of like wrap up on that one. I had one episode that was pretty kind of bad because, well, not the episode was bad, but I was not doing great. And I had to updose because of seizures, that episode. But I went up to 5, and I was like, guys, I wasn't expecting getting seizures
Yep.
after holding for a while. I'm disappointed, but I always end up like being hopeful, like, okay, it totally sucked, but I'm still here. I almost died, but I didn't. I'm still hanging on here. And in a way, this podcast series is also kind of a lifeline. Like, hey, I'm gonna try. Because I want to. There's so many reasons why I want to get out of this or just stabilize, get better, whatnot. I want to be there for my partner, but I want to be there for the community, and I also really want to advocate for, and make a difference. There's a reason that
Exactly.
this
And I
happened to
love
me.
that.
Yeah.
I'm excited talking to you, because just the energy and the passion you have for this is palpable. It's just amazing. It's like, and so I really value that,
Oh,
and I
thank you.
love hearing that in your voice and all you've done. And I mean, all we need is just more people like you and duplicate that and keep this effort going and get, but you have the energy. I think you have the interest. You got the background in social work. You have all the pieces, and I'm just excited for having you on the international team, to
Thank
be
you.
helping everybody. This is great work. So you do a lot of great work, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I'm
You
very
betcha.
grateful for you too.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So I wonder if we should wind things up here. I want to close out with a couple things for you before we do that. I always like to end up with one thing, which is, if you had one piece of advice for people going through benzo withdrawal that you could just leave anybody with, what would that be?
Educate yourself. Educate yourself. And it's not a race.
And where would you recommend they do that? What's your favorites?
Oh, my favorites. Well, the Asher Manual is a good thing to start, but actually the best thing is the Deprescribing Guidelines of the Colorado Consortium.
Oh, great.
That is
Okay.
gold. That is gold. It will also refer to the Asher Manual, but it's basically the revamp. It's like all we know now. These are guidelines. It's gold. That's the best thing. That's the best thing.
That's a first time I've heard that from the community, not from the professional community, but from the benzo community. And I appreciate that, because I don't think I've really emphasized those on my channel. And maybe I should. I never really kind of thought that direction, but I need to write some stuff and maybe kind of promote that for people to go access that, because the people that behind that, like I said, it's people from BIC and Alliance and BOG that
All
kind
the
of all
logos are
work
there.
together. Yep, they all work together. And we got those 3 documents out, and I you're right. They're really good standards for people to go to and use. So it's a good reminder.
And it's good for patients. It's good for prescribers or deprescribers.
Right.
So you can, because I think I said it in one of the episodes when I actually put a link in for this document, and I just praised it a lot. I was like, guys, the Asher Manual, that's like, if you want to print that out and take it with you, that's like a lot of papers. Just do the Colorado thing. It refers to the Asher Manual, and it's just more updated. It's more in the now. It's like what we know now.
It is updated, yeah. I mean, Ashton is the Bible and love it to death. But you're right. There's some things have changed. We've learned some things. There's some new terminologies. There's some new realizations that, everything needs to get updated eventually. and that includes the action manual. But I'm glad you brought up also the Shane Kenny movie, because that one was so great, because it had both of Heather Ashton and it had
Malcolm later.
And I love seeing both of those in a movie. It's like, wow, it's because two powerhouses of the benzo movement, and so it was great to see them both in that movie. So anybody who hasn't checked that out, I'm glad you brought that up. So check out your podcast where you're talking about that, and check out the movie, because that's great reference. So, and I'll make sure I put links to all these things in the show notes for this podcast, so they can check you out. So first of all, where do people go to hear your podcast?
Right, Benzo Tired is available on Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Excellent. And they just search for Benzo Tired and they'll find it. It'll come up.
Yep, Benzo Tired. It'll come up.
Awesome. Do you have a website or anything else right now?
No.
Okay.
Nothing.
One of these days, though, we'll get you out there with one. You got to get you set
I'm just
up.
very busy creating episodes, and whoever I just got, like, today, someone is making a documentary in the UK, and she was like, "Do you want to be a part of the documentary?" I'm like, "Yes." I'm just very busy trying to advocate and spread awareness.
I know how that feels. And it's only going to keep building, and it's great, but also take care of yourself on the way, because you don't want to. I'm still learning that. I'm still naive in the whole self-care thing. And I'm learning that this past year that, I push myself too far. And just the self-care is something to always pay attention to. You're not helping anybody if you hurt yourself.
The oxygen mask theory, I believe.
Exactly.
In that, yeah.
Put it on your face first before you put it on anybody with you.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
This has been a pleasure. Naftal, and I guess I'll be on yours here shortly soon too. So we'll be talking on both podcasts, and I look forward to that conversation. I'm sure we'll have plenty more things to talk about when we get there.
Definitely, for sure. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, thanks for taking the time, and it was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Naftal. I just want to share my appreciation for not only taking the time to speak with us today, but also for all the work you're doing, and the vision you have, and the energy you have, and the passion you have for helping people. It's great. It's fantastic. We need more people like you, and I'm grateful that you're out there doing what you're doing. So thank you so much. Our next scheduled episode is episode 124, and it will be released, if I can talk. I'm mumbling my words. You could tell in the intro I was mumbling, and of course I'm recording this outro. I like to call it an outro sometimes, the closing. I'm recording this outro right after I record the intro, because the whole conversation in the middle that you heard was recorded, about 3 days ago. Anyway, you didn't need to know that, but I shared it with you anyway. Episode 124 will be released next month, but if not before that, we'll might even put out something there mid-month. I always have blog posts. I try to do 2 to 3 of those a week. So if you're not subscribed to our newsletter or on logged in or created a profile on our site, do so. That's where you can learn about all the stuff we go and all the content that's happening. So, but thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And don't forget to let us know how we did. Keep calm, taper slowly, and take care of yourself. I will see you next time. Thanks.